Today's guest is a most extraordinary lady. She is Rhonda Britten. She is the founder of the Fearless Living Institute. She is a regular on Oprah show. She has been voted America's favorite life coach. She has got more accolades than I could rattle off. And I talk about some of them at the start of the interview. And her story, her backstory is just quite extraordinary. But this is a phenomenal interview to really understand about fear, how fear holds us back, how we live with fear, how we use fear, both positively and negatively, and also how we can put kind of names and labels on fears to help us to ensure that they are not going to get in our ways, and how to actually manage those to ensure that we're living fulfilling lives. So this is just one of those extraordinary interviews. She, as I say, Rhonda is an extraordinary lady with an extraordinary story, backstory, which really, when you see where she has got to and what she's achieved, you kind of wonder, wow, that is just awesome that has happened. So I really encourage you to listen. There's loads of resources that she's giving away, and there's loads of information about her in the show notes that you can connect to her website and connect further with her. I'd also encourage you to go to my own website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, where there is a ton of interviews there in the podcast with some other great guests where you really can learn an awful lot from listening to those really, really extraordinary people that we've been fortunate enough to have on the podcast. But I really encourage you to sit back and enjoy this really, really, I think, great interview. Not because it is me, but because of Rhonda. It is just a great interview of content with the phenomenal Rhonda Britten. Rhonda, you're very welcome on the podcast today. We're really delighted to have you here, hailing all the way from Los Angeles.
Well, thank you. You are so kind, and I cannot wait to support you and your tribe to be fearless.
That'd be fantastic. This is going to sound as if I'm really trying to, as we would say in Ireland, which is plumoss you, which means flatter you, but I'm not necessarily trying to do that because I'm just trying to give context to everybody. I mean, you're the founder of the Fearless Living Institute. You're an Emmy Award winner. You're a repeat Oprah guest, which is incredible. You've been voted America's life coach.
Favorite life coach. Don't forget that word, John.
Oh, sorry.
America's favorite life coach. Yeah.
Very important.
Yes,
Marianne Williamson, whom I would be a huge fan of, that wrote the Course in Miracles, said of you, what she, being you, has accomplished within herself and now helps others to accomplish is nothing short of miraculous. To get that from Marianne Williamson is incredible. You've altered lives. It's 600 episodes of reality television that airs in 25 countries and impacted millions. You've authored 4 books, includes Fearless Living, Change Your Life in 30 Days, Fearless Loving, and Do I Look Fat in This, which I love. So what do you do in your spare time?
I love to go out to lunch with my best friend.
Oh, okay, that's fair enough. But I mean, all of that, and I say all of that because, I mean, they're all incredible. I mean, to be a kind of a real favorite of Oprah, to have Marianne Williamson say things like that, to be voted America's favorite life coach, I get it right the second time around, is amazing. But this sounds like somebody who has not kind of, fear has just not touched them in their lives. But that is not true of you, is it?
No, it is not. It's actually, fear has touched me, and therefore I've been able, with a lot of hard work and effort, figured out a way to transcend it, which is what I teach, what I support, what Marianne's talking about, why they had me on 600 episodes of television, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, it's the exact opposite. When people look at people that are, again, whatever you want to call it, I don't think of myself as, oh, she's successful, even though, of course, I've been coaching for 25 years. I just think I'm somebody who had dogged determination, because if I didn't, I would be dead.
Because your backstory is actually, I mean, interesting is an understatement, and spectacular is also an understatement, and horrifying is also an understatement. Do you want to maybe share with the audience what that was, if you don't mind?
Sure, of course. You're talking about the worst day of my life. And what you're referring to is the day, Father's Day. My father and mother were recently separated. I was 14 years old at the time. And my father was coming to take us out to Sunday brunch. And we had 3 kids, 2 adults, 5 people. We never went out because it was too expensive. And so it was a big deal that we're going out to brunch. And so my father comes over. He's like, come on, come on, come on, let's go. My 2 sisters are in the bathroom fighting it out, as sisters do in our one little bathroom. And me and my mother and father start walking out to the car for Sunday brunch. And as my father lifts up the trunk, called the boot over there, as he grabs his coat, I noticed that he actually didn't grab a coat, and he grabbed a gun, and he starts screaming at my mother, you made me do this, you made me do this, and he fires. And I start screaming, Dad, what are you doing? Stop, Dad, what are you doing? And he cocks the gun and points it at me, and I'm completely convinced I'm next. And he blinks and I blink, and he stares and I stare, and it felt like an hour, and I'm sure it was only just a few seconds. Because the next thing I know, my mother, with her last breath, literally screams, no, don't. And my father, realizing my mother's still alive, takes that bullet intended for me and shoots my mother a second time. And that second bullet goes through my mother's abdomen, out her back, and lands on the car horn. And for the next 25 minutes, all I heard was, and then my father cocks the gun again, falls to his knees, puts the gun to his head, and fires. And I am the sole witness of watching my father murder my mother and commit suicide in front of me. Now, John, that was horrific enough. But then what ended up happening is, of course, I don't know how other people would do it, but what I did is I blamed myself, because I was the only one physically that could have changed that outcome. And I did nothing heroic. I didn't grab the gun. I didn't even jump in front of my mother. I didn't kick my father in the shins. All I got out was, stop, Dad, stop. And now my mother is dead and I'm left standing. So for the next 20 years, I basically split in two. The outside Rhonda, which everyone met, was fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. No, I'm fine. But the internal Rhonda really, basically, with that guilt and that shame and that blame, basically started to self-destruct internally. Now, externally, again, kept up straight A's, got a scholarship to college, but started really believing that there was something wrong with me. My father's blood did run through my veins, and that I absolutely am not good enough.
Yeah. So how did that play out? How did that play out in your, okay, you're keeping this veneer of,
yes,
I'm
fine.
Coping with, I'm fine. I'm coping with everything. And I've really, I've got my life together and I've got my act together. Yes. But how is it actually manifesting? Because it isn't just inside. It's not just staying there.
Yeah. How it manifests is as I hit college. So, I grew up in a little tiny town in Upper Michigan, and where this happened. And then when I went away to college down to Minneapolis, Minnesota, big giant school, nobody knew my story. So I really felt like I'm free. Nobody knows my history, because after it happened, my relatives didn't come over. People weren't allowed to play with me anymore, hang out with me, because I was not from one of those families. Yeah. Wow. And nothing ever happened like that ever in our town. So it was like shocking. And so when I went to college, it was like, I thought it was a reprieve, right? Like, whew, nobody knows my story. I can stuff it down really, really, really deep now and never tell anybody what happened. So I'm not walking around with a scarlet letter on me. When in fact, when you do that, when we stuff, I soon found alcohol. And that alcohol, of course, did not do well with guilt, shame, and blame. And I ended up drinking my way through college, becoming an alcoholic, getting 3 DUIs, trying to kill myself 3 times. And it was really my 3rd suicide attempt that I realized something, John. I realized that I'm not going to die. I'm not very good at killing myself. And I have to literally find another way. Now, one more thing, John. During those years of me being an alcoholic, suicide attempts, DUIs, I was going to therapy and reading books and going to workshops. I was reading a self-help book when I was 12 years old. Wow. So that whole time I was trying to fix myself, heal myself, get on the other side of this, right? But no matter what I did, no matter what I learned, it was interesting and gave me skills and gave me tools, and it was all wonderful, but it never took away the feeling that there was something wrong with me. Never took away the feeling that I'm not good enough. And
Mhm.
when I recovered from my third suicide attempt, and I went to by the way, a psychiatric ward, that's where they put you to check if you're crazy after 3 times. And they deemed me not crazy. And I went home. I realized that, like I said, I'm not dying, I'm living, and I better figure out another way because I can't keep living like this.
And if you go back and you were reading all the self-help and, doing all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff,
Yeah.
and that clearly wasn't working. So
it was great. It was great for tools and skills, right? It was great for ahas,
right.
but it didn't fundamentally change me at my core.
Okay. And it was part when you went away to that other school in an area that you weren't known. Was that kind of part of trying to reinvent yourself and become somebody else and somebody different?
Oh, sure. I'm sure it was. I was like, nobody, it's not like people brought it up in my face at my little tiny hometown, but, I knew everybody knew and everybody whispered around me. And, it
was the label you carried on your back.
Yeah, exactly. My relatives, my relatives did not come and check on us, so we were kind of ostracized.
Yeah.
So going to and then University of Minnesota at the time was the largest enrollment school in the country. So I was like in a school of like 120,000 people. I mean, come on, can't somebody hide there? I figured, right? So that's what I was really looking for, is to reinvent myself. Yeah. Nobody knew my story. I could tell anybody anything I wanted to.
So with all the episodes of, attempted suicide, the alcohol and everything else that's going on, and, and you were still reading the self-help books.
That's right. That's right.
You probably were taking it intellectually, but not any other way. What was that kind of pivot that actually said, okay, enough is enough? Was it, I've got to the lowest ebb, or what was it that kind of suddenly kind of say, Christ, let's actually do something about this?
It was really my third suicide attempt because, I would have rather been dead. And when I woke up, I remember thinking to myself, I guess I'm not dying, and I guess I'm not supposed to die. That was really critical for me. Like, oh, I get it now. I'm not supposed to die. I've got to figure this out. And so I remember sitting at home in my little studio apartment going, okay, well, you have all these books, you've gone all these workshops, you've done therapy, you've done all this stuff, which is all good. I love therapy, love workshops, love books, but fundamentally, you still don't feel different about yourself. And I don't think I'm the only one alone. I think I'm not alone in this. I think a lot of people do spirituality and self-help and personal development and read books and go to workshops, but fundamentally still in the dark night feel like there's something wrong with them.
Well, I sometimes think actually with people, I thought they almost get addicted. They get addicted to the therapy or to the self-help or whatever, but don't necessarily see that as a route to getting better, that it's different to getting better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I had earnest desire to get better. I think I really did. Again, maybe I was addicted, I love self-help still. I still have, 40 books next to my bed and a whole library, right? Like I love it. I love it. I love it. But I was really trying to get rid of the feeling, like I wanted to feel differently. And it was when I had that third suicide attempt that I really decided that I had to, out of desperation, mind you, it wasn't like I thought I was smart at this point. I literally thought like, well, I've tried everything else. I guess I'm going to have to make this stuff up myself. And I really did out of desperation. I wasn't thinking I was smart or I'm going to cure myself. I just basically thought like, I have to figure this out. Like I have to really figure this out. And I think one of the things that I denied, and I think a lot of people deny, is that I didn't even see fear. I didn't even name it. I didn't even know it existed, because even during this whole time, I did not say I'm afraid or I'm scared. I didn't walk around saying I'm afraid of such and such. I'm scared of such and such. Fear wasn't really part of my vocabulary. It didn't even occur to me that I had fear. And I think that's true for so many people that come and study with me. They're not walking around saying I'm afraid or I'm scared, but they know that there's something missing. They know there's something that they can't figure out. It's like a door that's unlocked and they're looking for the key. And for me, when I started making up my exercises and they started working, I started realizing like, wait a minute, this is fear. And then I really devoted myself to understanding fear and no longer being afraid to look at fear, and no longer thinking fear was weakness or fear was, for those people, you know, like, it's like, no, fear is part and parcel of our neurobiology. And when I started, shifting that thought, everything changed for me.
So how did you then shift from okay, you acknowledged it was fear. So how did you shift from fear to fearless?
Well,
What actually was the process that you went through? I know that's what you walk your clients through, but how did you experience that, going through that?
Yeah. Well, I started making up exercises, and every exercise is added to the next exercise, and then added to the next exercise, and added to the next exercise.
What would those exercises be?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first one I did on the day I got home from the psychiatric ward, I remember sitting in my studio apartment going, okay, well, now what? Right? Like, now what?
Right.
And I remember saying to myself, I have to start over. I have to start over. So what do they do in kindergarten? And I really said this to myself, what do they do in kindergarten? And I said, well, they give you a calendar with gold stars. So I actually went to the store, got a calendar and gold stars, and decided that the first thing that I had to figure out was I worth saving? And was there hope for me? And so I started putting gold stars on a calendar every day for any time, John, anytime I did anything good. So some of and I still have that calendar, by the way. And those things were like, okay, so you got angry today, but you didn't break anything, you know, or you felt hurt, but you didn't have a drink, right? Like I'm talking anything, like, oh, clean the house, but didn't stop myself from, cleaning it spotless, whatever. I mean, it was literally anything. When I look at my calendar today, I'm like, wow. I mean, it was just literally anything. And at the end of 30 days, my calendar was filled with gold stars. And that moment for me, John, was hope. Like, I was like, okay, now there is someone worth saving. Like, look at, you have all these gold stars, you're worth saving. And so that really brought my creating exercises and helping myself to a whole new level. Like, I had to accelerate it because now I was worth saving. So I had decided killing myself wasn't going to work because obviously I was supposed to stay alive. So then I just started creating the next exercise and the next exercise and the next exercise. And
I mean, okay, two things in my head. One is, how did that progress then to actually kind of setting up the business? But the other question for maybe before you answer that is, but isn't a certain amount of fear healthy?
Well, we're talking about probably two different types of fear. So we're talking about, there's physical fear and there's emotional fear. Okay. And physical fear is our survival. And awesome, if you're in an elevator and if you have a funny feeling, get out of the elevator, right? If you're walking to your car and you feel odd, turn around, right? So we're talking, that's instinctual, like, i.e., I have to survive. Mm-hmm. The thing about the brain, John, is that the brain doesn't know the difference between an emotional fear and a physical fear. So when we're having an instinct to stay alive physically, that same system, that neurobiology, is actually also working on our emotional fears. And most of us don't recognize our emotional fears or have a relationship with our emotional fears. So emotional fears like fear of failure, fear of success, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of identity, right? All of those fears that really impact our lives on an everyday basis for most of us. For most people, they are impacted, off and on all day long with these fears. And they don't even know it's fear. They actually think it's character flaws, character defects, their problems, the things that are wrong with them. Oh, if I just wasn't a procrastinator. Oh, if I just wasn't a perfectionist. Oh, if I just didn't feel anxious. Oh my God, if I just didn't compare, if I didn't compete, if I just didn't. And they don't know, and they don't understand that that's actually fear keeping them safe. And there is a way to circumvent that. There's a way out of that. So people don't know, one, that their procrastination is fear. They don't know that their comparing is fear. They don't know that their perfectionism and people pleasing is fear, because it allows them to beat themselves up and put themselves down, and it keeps them in this never ending spiral of proving themselves or thinking they're not good enough, or well, if I just try hard. So it goes into that reward and punishment and sacrifice and all those things.
But it is, I mean, what you're saying there about I'm not good enough. I mean, Is there a human being alive that doesn't think that at
No,
some stage? So
of course.
is it a spectrum? Is it that, okay, if you take the spectrum, whatever way you want to, kind of measure it, but that at a certain level, having that I'm not good enough is not all that bad for you. But if it kind of goes up on that spectrum, it becomes damaging. But a little bit is maybe not too bad for you.
Well, this is what I know to be true. We're all human beings, and we all have this great humanity.
Mm.
And whenever we're moving into our humility and we're like, wow, I am a human being and I am flawed and I am et cetera, that's humanity, that's humility, that's connection to life itself, right?
Mm.
But when you're using the I'm not good enough as your reason, your rationale, your excuse for doing your dreams, for taking that next step, for falling in love, opening your business, tripling your income, building a team, again, whatever it is, that's what stops most people. So I have a method called stretch, risk, and die. And I talk about how on one hand, we all have fear. So that's just it.
Mm.
We're not getting rid of fear. I never sit there and go, I'm going to show you how to get rid of fear. That's impossible.
Yeah.
We have a neurobiology. We have a brain. We have a system that actually is, quote unquote, on some level fear-based, because it is meant to keep us physically alive. Because as you know, John, the brain doesn't know the difference between that physical and emotional fear. And it also doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality.
Mm.
And the brain also is now being discovered that a lot of our fears are handed down through our DNA. So I'm not saying, oh, get fearless and you'll never have fear. No. What I'm saying is you're never going to let fear stop you from going forward in the things that really turn you on, really make you happy, really that you really want. And most people don't get stopped because they think it's fear. They get stopped because they think they can't, or they don't know how, or they have a problem, right? And all of that is just what I call in Fearless Living, fear responses. So you have fear responses. Great. Let's look at your fear responses, and then let's identify what I call the wheel of fear and wheel of freedom. And you do not have to get stopped by that, quote unquote, I'm not good enough. If only I was different. I just wish I wasn't procrastinating, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to be stopped by those things.
So Rhonda, so if we talk about stuff, that's kind of where it's the self-talk that's actually limiting me, and it's the self-talk but what about situations, and I'm sure that, you've had many clients come to you that are living in real fear in terms of they're in abusive relationships. They are, they maybe have got, a fatal illness, whatever it might be, but they're real things. They're not just kind of silly thoughts going through my head or irrational thoughts. These are real. How do you actually work with somebody to get them to manage their fear? Because you're not going to eliminate it.
No, I'm not interested in eliminating it.
No.
First of all, we're not wired for that. So I think, like I always tell my clients, like if you ever see a workshop or somebody tells you you're going to get rid of your fear for good, I say, next question to ask them is that when's the lobotomy? Because you're not getting rid of it. What I'm interested in, John, is helping you transcend it. So it doesn't decide your life for you. I don't want fear to decide your life. And sadly, for most of us, most of the time, fear is what decides our life. And it's disguised as rationale. It's disguised as being smart. It's disguised as, I know best, right? That's what it's disguised as. And we really believe it because it is so ingrained in us, because, our what I call the wheel of fear is created by the time you're 5. So, whether it is a real fear or an imagined fear, it is almost irrelevant, because fear is fear is fear. So sure, I've had people have domestic violence, I've had illnesses, but most of my clients are, people that want to triple their income, people that want to fall in love, people that want to finally lose weight, people that just want to go for that thing that they want that they haven't been able to achieve. So if somebody's in a domestic violence situation, obviously I'm going to move into practical application right away, right? I'm going to move into things that are practical that they need to do right now to keep themselves safe. Because again, remember, it's physical safety versus emotional safety. You can't have emotional safety unless you're physically safe. Mm-hmm. So I help my clients get physically safe before I can work on their emotional safety. And that's the same with illness, et cetera. Like I was just talking to a client yesterday who was in a very difficult car accident and actually had to have neck surgery and was basically on the verge of being paralyzed. So she has real physical issues, right? It's not about denying your human reality. It's actually about embracing it and then working through the things that really matter to you and deciding, to live the life your soul intended, as I say.
So say, going back to some of the examples that you gave, say somebody comes to you and says, actually, Rhonda, you know what I really want you to do? I want you to help me overcome my fear, if that's the way they would have positioned it. Probably not.
They actually never do. They never
No, they
do
probably
these.
would.
So they never do. They never say, most people, again, don't know what their fear is and they don't recognize it. Most people just come to me and goes, I hear you're America's favorite life coach, and, or got a referral or whatever, and I want to open my business, or I can't communicate with my spouse, or I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's wrong with me, right? Like, a lot of people come to me because they've done a lot of work on themselves, but they still can't seem to get past.
Okay. So how do you how do you work with that person? So I come and I say, listen, I've been, breaking my neck around it for the last number of years, but my business, I just can't get it past a certain threshold or whatever it might be. How do you then work with somebody who comes to you? I mean, what do you do with them to actually get them through that?
Yeah. Well, I put them through a process. And one of the things that I help them identify is, and I have hundreds of exercises. I mean, when I did my 600 episodes of television, I basically on average did 1 to 3 exercises a day that I created. So I have, 2,000 exercises that I've done for TV, let alone the exercises that I've created for my clients, et cetera. So I have one of the things that I didn't know I could do until I was on television, actually. And of course it makes sense because I did this for myself, but I didn't know this. What I'm really good at is creating exercises that you might have tried everything to get past your past, right? You might have tried everything to figure it out. But I'm really good at figuring out something for you to do that is unique to you, that really unlocks you. So that's one of the things that I do, is I create really unique exercises for people. The other thing that
give me an example of what that might look like. Can you give me an example of what that?
Well, I'm going to give you a basic one because, it's easy, right? So I teach sometimes workshops. Once in a while, I'll teach my workshop called Starting Over Intensive. And so instead of having somebody just write their negative thoughts down, right? Or, what they say to beat themselves up, I get army guys from the dollar store, and I have a green army and a brown army. And I actually ask them to use Post-it notes and write on the green army what they say to themselves when they're beating themselves up. Just tell me what do you say when you beat yourself up? Just tell me what you say, right? Well, I don't say it very often. I don't care. I don't care if you say it once every 10 years. I just want you to write it down, because again, people rationalize. Well, I don't really do it I understand, but you're here for a reason. So why not try it? What's the big deal? Let's do it. And so I say, any thought you've had in the last couple of years, I don't care if it was for 1 second, write down those thoughts that you think, and I want you to put them, choose your army, brown or green, go ahead, pick one. And so they do it, and they pick the army, and then I hand them a pack of Post-it notes, and they write on, their negative thoughts. And then I say, and then tell me what that other part of you comes in and says. How do you argue with yourself? And so I basically set up a physical manifestation of what's going on inside their head, so that they get perspective, and then I can talk about it in a different way rather than it being inside of them, right? Where it's really personal. I can actually externalize it and support them in seeing something different. And then, of course, we have exercises after that. But that's just one example. And I have people create glasses. I mean, again, I have so many exercises. And then those exercises give them a way to see their behavior, see themselves differently, so that when I can start working on what I call the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom, and help them identify what their core fear is, and identify the Wheel of Freedom that helps set them free, the antidote to the fear, they really are pliable, open, available to actually be more honest and truthful about what's really going on. Because again, most of us come in with a prettier picture, or either a more dramatic picture than really what's actually happening.
Right. So talk about these wheels that you mentioned them there. How does that actually work when you're working with somebody? Because these are exercises you put people through. So how does that actually work with clients?
Well, so I created something called the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom. And the Wheel of Fear has 4 parts, and the Wheel of Freedom has 4 parts. And so basically I'm just going to quickly just say the 4 parts of the Wheel of Fear, just to give you some perspective. So the Wheel of Fear has 4 parts. The first part is trigger, which we've all heard that word before. Oh, you're triggered. In the work that I've done with neuroscience and, just my practical experience, is one of the things that has been identified is that the real way to change your life is creating a new filtering system, right? Creating that mental model and changing your filtering system. So most people like pick piecemeals. They change this behavior, change that thought, etc. But in reality, that's going to do, don't get me wrong, it's going to be doing some great good. Yet to really radically change somebody's life, you need to literally change their filtering system. Like literally change the way they literally see the world. So I help them identify when fear is triggered. And again, people aren't triggered all the time. I always tell clients, if there's 12 areas of life or 100% of your time, you're probably triggered, 10, 20, 30% of the time. 70% of the time you're good to go. You're just having lunch with a friend, right? It's not haunting you. It's not bothering you. So we want to find the places in your life. Is it health that you get triggered? Is it your business? Like where is the kind of like the place that really fear owns you, right? And so then I put them through this series of exercises that help them identify what I call the trigger. And what for me in Fearless Living, what the trigger is, John, is their core fear, the fear that is above all fears, the fear that is underneath every single other, what I call fear responses. So then the second thing, so that's the trigger. Then the second thing on the wheel is called fear responses. And this is what everybody thinks their problems are. So I procrastinate. That's a fear response. I people please. That's a fear response, right? I eat chocolate. That's a fear response, right? So instead of people thinking, because people come to me and go, well, I procrastinate and then I people please, and they think they have all these problems. And what I do is I basically take all those problems, all the things they think are what's stopping them, and I put them as a fear response because that's actually not the problem. That is just a response to what their core fear is. And then what I show them is from a fear response, the third aspect of the wheel of fear is what I call the core negative feeling. And this is the feeling that they want to avoid feeling. Like we're all running around trying to, for most of us, most people, until you, again, embrace and really start seeing that every feeling is worthwhile and valuable. But for most people, they're running around avoiding feeling a certain feeling because that feeling is so painful, is so... brings up the past, right? Triggers the crap out of them. They don't want to feel that feeling. So again, we go from the trigger, i.e. what I call the core fear. We move to fear responses, which are the way they respond when they get triggered. Then those fear responses, when they start acting from procrastination, people pleasing, then they start having a core negative feeling. And then from that core negative feeling, they dump into, if they keep feeling that feeling, they dump into what I call self-destructive behaviors, which is the things that people, I can't believe I still do that. I hate myself for that, right? And then the self-destructive behaviors basically say to them, well, then I've really got to fix myself now because I cannot keep doing this. And it just keeps proving the wheel over. And then the antidote is the wheel of freedom. And that also has 4 parts. So I teach people, show people, and help them discover really what is driving that, what that mechanism is. And then I show them the wheel of freedom and help them discover what their wheel of freedom is. So then when they're walking around the world and they start experiencing a fear response, a negative thought, a excuse, people pleasing, procrastination, again, comparing, competing, shaming, blaming, again, whatever it is, they can stop immediately as soon as they recognize it and go, okay, wait a minute, I know what to do. And they can move on to what I call the wheel of freedom. And that helps them access a different part of themselves that is more true, more real, more empowering.
And has that got 4 parts to it as well?
Yes.
And what are the 4 parts to that?
Sure. The wheel of freedom has 4 parts. The first part is what I call the essential nature. And what I say, John, is your essential nature is that part of you that you hid a long time ago because it wasn't safe to show. And again, remember, part of our neuroscience is saying now that some of our greatest fears are handed down through our DNA. So people like me, go to therapy and, they go to a coach or whatever, and they're asking the questions, why am I like this? Why? And basically my work eliminates the why, because you start seeing why it works and how it works from a mechanical place. And then you see the practical application in your everyday life. So the wheel of fear has the wheel of freedom has the first thing, which is the essential nature. And like I said, John, that essential nature is that part that you've denied, you don't have access to when you're triggered. When you get triggered, that part of you just hide away, right? Like can't do that. Can't do that right now. When you're not triggered, you totally can do it. But when you're triggered, nope, put that back. So you're on your essential nature. We want to help you access that when you're triggered. Then we move into what we call proactive behaviors that are in alignment with your essential nature. So then you know what to do, you know what to say, the actions to take. And then from the proactive behaviors, when you start taking those actions and having those thoughts and saying those things, you start feeling a sense of wholeness. You start feeling connected to yourself, all the parts of yourself. You start feeling, again, I'll just use the word wholeness. You start feeling like you're whole within yourself, that there is nothing wrong with you. And then from that wholeness, the fourth aspect is self-affirming behaviors. And self-affirming behaviors are the part of you that, when life works, like when you're filled with grace and ease and, flow, right? Yeah. That's when you're in self, like you don't have to think about being patient. You're just patient, you just have all the patience in the world, right? Like it's just.
Yeah. What I love about that is that on both sides of that coin, you're actually giving language and a logical sequence to the destructive and then the restructuring and the constructive side to it, which I think is really helpful for people to really have the language and the words. And it's the wheel is kind of got a connotation of it's something I can play with, it's something I can use, and that's really powerful.
Thank you. Well, it was the key for me to really change my life. I created those exercises and I started feeling better, et cetera, over and over again. But it wasn't until I really figured out the wheels, uncovered the wheels, had that aha moment with the wheels and started working the wheels and started, then eventually having clients later on and working the wheels with them, that I really understood the power of it. Because again, in the beginning, I just thought it was for me, John. Like I was just this is what works for me. Yeah. But when I started years later,
you were a pretty good subject matter to start with. Let's be honest. There was plenty to work with, so you weren't short in that sense. Well, if you're looking for a model, it wasn't bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what it was, John, too. I think why it worked or why it works is because I had done so many things, and really what I was doing was looking for the cracks in the systems that I had gone through, as well as the things that were in common, because again, they were all lovely things. I love therapy. I love energy healing. I love shaman work. I love, personal development, self-help, you name it. I worked with Marianne Williamson for years. And so, again, all those things were awesome. But I think for me, one of the things why I've created such a practical tool is, people would just say, read the book, whatever, be more loving, just love yourself more. And I'd be like, how do you love yourself if you don't know how to love yourself? And so I really do think that one of the things that what I think that I'm good at and what I needed in my own life and what I gave myself is those labels and is the practical application every day. Okay, now what do I do? So that it didn't become like procrastination. I got to do one thing, and then over here, perfectionism, I have to do another thing, and then people pleasing, I have to do another thing. It's like, I had so many tools and so many, it just became this big box of stuff. I didn't know how to apply anything.
But that wheel gives you that tool.
That's right. It puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, and it also kind of gives you almost like which gear to be in that.
That's right.
In that wheel, which is really powerful. Rhonda, I've kept you way beyond what I said I was going to keep you, and my apologies for that. But love it. It has been fascinating. Before I get into some of the one question that I was, you talk about making your fears your friends.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, I understand what that means up here. Right.
Yeah, logically. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that I actually really understand it. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Well, I know you understand it, and I know you understand it because you live it. And, really, once we understand that our neurobiology, the way that we're literally wired is to keep ourselves safe. Our whole body, brain, everything about us is an energy system. And let's just say we have 100 units of energy. Let's just say that, right? And our job, fear's job is to keep that energy protected and safe. So what's one way that we protect our energy? Well, the brain is actually wired, which is so mind-blowing to me. So if you have a problem in the present, a decision to make in the present, a choice to make in the present, how the brain works automatically is it will look in the past for a template to apply to the present to create a different future, which of course never works. So unless we are consciously awake, unless we're consciously aware, we're not going to be able to move from fear to freedom. So when I say that fear becomes your friend, is that you really start understanding, and I know this is true, that fear really, really only exists. Only reason it exists in our neurobiology is basically to keep ourselves safe physically. And again, remember, the brain doesn't know the difference between physical fears and emotional. So it doesn't know that fear of failure is a fear of failure. It actually thinks it's you jumping out of a plane. It doesn't know the difference. It's the same thing. So when you're having that emotional fear versus that physical fear, the brain and body is just trying to do the same thing. It's just trying to keep you safe. And the definition of safe is, well, gee, Rhonda Britten's still alive right now. I must have done a good job, so it will literally go to the back door and what you've done before, because it knows it works. So fear, absolutely. I always say freedom equals your capacity to live in the unknown. Freedom equals your capacity to live in the unknown. And so once you understand that fear really, really is just here to keep you safe. And I always say this and people are like, what? But fear loves you. Fear loves you. Its job is not to make you successful. Its job is not to make you happy. That's not fear's job. Fear's job is to keep you safe. That's its job. So once you understand, it's its job. Now, Rhonda Britten, using my frontal lobe, can actually make different choices. But if I don't take my power back and actually say, thank you, fear, I got it, and start jumping on my wheel of freedom, fear will automatically always decide my future. It'll always decide my present. So whenever I'm in unknown situation, so I get to realize, okay, it's just a safety mechanism. It's just how we're wired. And if I can see it that way, I can look at it with real great love and just love and connection. And, and again, as you move from your wheel of fear and wheel of freedom, and as you evolve, as you know, John, is that you have less and less fear. It doesn't mean it doesn't visit you. If I, Rhonda Britten, don't feel fear on a regular basis, it means I'm not going into the unknown. It means I'm not growing. So it's not about, I don't have any fear. It's actually, if somebody comes to me, well, I don't have any fear, I'm like, first of all, you're ignorant, one. And first, you're ignorant. You have no idea. But secondly, you're not growing then. You're not risking. You're not. So it's not about,
you're not pushing any boundaries.
Not pushing. You're right. So I want to feel what it's called stretch, risk, and die. It's another model of mine. A stretch, risk, and die every day, or, every week or every month, because that's what allows me to become more of who I am. And that's what I'm here to do. For me personally, I'm here to live the life my soul intended. And that is me moving beyond who I think I am and becoming more of what I was born to be.
That's a brilliant explanation of that. Your fears are your friends. That is absolutely brilliant. This has been brilliant. I could go on because I'm just loving this topic, and I could keep talking to you about this. But before we wrap up, 2 questions to ask everyone. A book that, other than your own, that has made us.
Now.
I know, but listen, we promote those in the show notes, so you're getting that bit. But I want to ask you one other than your own that made an impact upon you, and why that was.
There are so many books. I'm going to tell you 2. One is called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Yeah, fabulous.
That's a classic, and seriously, that everybody should read that book. Like that should be a book that we all read, right? And I'm debating between the other 2. One is called, if you're on the spiritual bent, I invite you to read something called The Letters of the Scattered Brotherhood. And if you're going, wow, Rhonda, I don't know about that, then read The Verbally Abusive Relationship. And the reason I want you to read The Verbally Abusive Relationship is that you will be shocked at how often you're the perpetrator, right? When you read that book, people starts understanding like, oh, you mean that's not okay? So The Verbally Abusive Relationship is a book that I ask every single one of my coaches to read. The Artist's Way is another one that I ask every coach that I work with, and again, many of my clients to read. Those are just classic tools that every single human being should have in their toolbox, and there are some, there's 3, 5, 10 books that I like every single coach, every single teacher, every single trainer, every single person that wants to self-evolve needs to read. They're basic, like The Return to Love with Marianne Williamson, right?
Yeah,
Return to Love. Yeah. Hello. It's like that. That's going to explain spirituality in such a simple way. You're going to be like, oh, right?
Interesting. I heard just the other day, I heard Julia Cameron being interviewed by Russell Brand.
Oh,
And
really?
I used to, Russell, it was on Russell Brand's podcast. And I mean, she is amazing. I mean, she is
Oh,
absolutely extraordinary. Second
extraordinary.
question, daily rituals, if you have them, and I'm happy to share them.
Absolutely. I do have daily rituals. I think they're so important. So the first thing that I do in the morning and the last thing I do at night is say a prayer that I learned from Marianne Williamson and A Course in Miracles. And that is, God, where will you have me go? Where will you have me do? What will you have me say, and to who? Guide me in everything I do. So every morning, first thing I do and the last thing I do, that is how I open and close my days. The second ritual is that I always read, for me, is a spiritual book before I go to bed. I don't read a novel. I don't read a workbook. I'm always deepening my spiritual practice. And that helps me. People go like, do you ever ruminate? I'm like, I don't do that. Like, I never ruminate. I mean, I don't do that anymore. I don't think what I used to ruminate all the time. I read my diaries from 30 years ago and I'm like, oh my God, I mean, she was in so much pain, but I don't do that. And I think one of the ways that I don't do that is because I really end my day connected to what I believe is, the great beyond, right? Whatever you want to call it, the field, God, light, universe, spirit, whatever you want to source. So I read a spiritual book before I go to bed. So first thing my bedtime ritual is take a shower, put my tea kettle on, my electric teapot, get in the hot shower, break the day, take all the day off me. It's really important for me to clean my energy every day. And then I go make my tea, get into bed, read my spiritual book. And then as I'm, completing, then I move into my prayer. And that is how I end every day.
Fantastic. I love that. I really do. I really love that. Am I right in saying that you actually licensed practitioners in your material? I'm
I
correct?
do.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, because I think the people would be interested in that, and that there's a
I
process
certify
they can go
coaches
through.
and I certify trainers.
All right, okay, so people should do that. Where can people actually find out? Because your website is fantastic. There's a amazing amount of resources there. I'd recommend everyone. So where can they get in touch with you?
Sure, fearlessliving.org. And, because we're moving through such an extraordinary time, I created, and hopefully it's okay with you, John, if you don't mind if I do a giveaway.
Please, lovely, yeah.
So I realized just a couple weeks ago, as we're moving through this time in our history that is unprecedented in our lifetimes, I had created a course a while ago called How to Overcome Fear of the Unknown. Hello.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Which so many of us are dealing with right now, right? So I would love to gift that to your listeners. And it's, it's a mini course. It's like about an hour and a half, but it starts giving you understanding of the unknown and what to do, right? So go to fearlessliving.org, fearlessliving.org/gift, GIFT. So fearlessliving.org/gift, and go download. You're going to put your name in, you're going to put your email, because we have to give you access to the member center. And then if you want to unsubscribe, go for it. If you don't want to ever hear from Rhonda Britten again, but you're going to need to put your name and email to get access to it.
That is brilliant. And you're very kind and very generous, and I really appreciate that. I know the listeners will be thrilled to get that and when they actually listen to this podcast. Rhonda, it has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic. It's been hugely enjoyable, very informative, and a fascinating subject. And I understand why you have been voted America's favorite life coach. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And listen, look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, John. Be fearless.